senator from Arizona.
I ask further proceedings in the quorum call be suspended, and I be recognized.
Without objection. Senator from Arizona.
I ask unanimous consent that I be engaged in colloquy with the senator from South Carolina.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we'll have a vote here, I think around 11:30, on my amendment that would increase funding under OCO to address the consequences of an $18 billion shortfall from last year. I mean, all the reports we hear from the military is that sequestration is killing them. The mismatch of what we are now seeing in the world as compared with a continued $150 billion less than fiscal year 2011 is putting the lives of the men and women who are serving in this nation in danger. Now, I'm told that there's going to be a lot of people that vote against this increase of just to bring it up to last year's number, an increase of $18 billion. I say to my colleagues, you vote no on this, and the consequences will be on your conscience. Because if you ask any leader in uniform today in the military, they will tell you that the lives of the men and women who are serving this nation in uniform are at risk. I think we have a greater obligation, and that is the men and women who are serving in the military. The Chief of Staff of the United States Army said, we are putting the lives of the men and women serving in uniform at greater risk. That doesn't come from John McCain or Lindsey Graham. Talk to any military leader in uniform, and they will tell you that sequestration is killing them. Planes can't fly. People, parts of the military can't train and equip. We have 2 of our brigade combat teams that are fully ready to fight. Look at the world in 2011 when we started this idiotic sequestration, and look at the world today. My colleague serves both on the Armed Services Committee and spent about 33 years as a member of the United States military, a regular visitor to Kabul and in Baghdad. I think that he understands that what we are doing with sequestration and voting against this amendment, in my view, is putting the lives of the men and women who are serving in danger. Have no doubt about it. And there will be further attacks in Europe. There will be further attacks in the United States of America, and we won't be ready. And the responsibility for it will be those who vote no on this amendment. I'd ask my colleague.
Thank you. Here's the issue. To those who are a slave to these sequestration caps, to those who believe that sequestration in this budget practice we're involved is going to save the country, boy, I couldn't disagree with you more. We haven't moved the debt needle at all. Discretionary spending is not the reason we're in debt. We're spending at a 2008 level. So these are blind, across-the-board cuts limited to discretionary spending. A lot of programs are not even subject to sequestration, is not moving the debt needle. It is destroying the ability to defend this country. So the theory that we're advocating here today is that there is an emergency in the United States military that needs to be addressed, and we should be able to add money to the United States military, the Department of Defense, based on an emergency that's real and not be limited by caps that are insane. So here's the issue. Is there an emergency in terms of readiness? Is there an emergency in terms of operation and maintenance? Are we putting the ability to modernize our force at risk in an emergency situation because we don't have enough money to fight the wars we're in and modernize the force for the wars to come? If you don't believe us, here's what the Commandant of the Marine Corps said about the current state of readiness. Our aviation units are currently unable to meet our training and mission requirements, primarily due to ready basic aircraft shortfalls. I can tell you in the Marine Corps today, 70% of the F-18s have a problem meeting combat status. I can tell you today that the Army is stretched unlike any time I've ever seen. I can tell you today that the Navy is robbing Peter to pay Paul to keep the ships on the ocean. And with the numbers we have in terms of defense spending, they're having to forego modernization to deal with the readiness, to deal with the ability to fight the war. I can tell you that the Commandant of the Marine Corps is going to take 6 B-22s out of Spain that are used to rescue consulates and embassies that come under attack in Africa, because we need those planes to train pilots. And if we don't bring those planes back, we're not going to have an airworthy B-22 force at a time we need it. You're creating a hole and a vacuum in our ability to protect our diplomats and U.S. citizens in Africa. Could I just add one thing?
He's aware, was there at the hearing when General Milley, the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, testified the Army risks not having ready forces available to provide flexible options to our national leadership, and most importantly, risks incurring significantly increased U.S. casualties. I say to my colleagues that are going to vote against this, you are taking on a heavy burden of responsibility of incurring significantly increased U.S. casualties in case of an emergency. The military is not ready. We are $100 billion less than we were in 2011 when sequestration began, and the world has changed dramatically. I can't tell you my disappointment to hear that the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I don't know if my colleague knows, said that he's going to vote against it using some rationale that they're increasing by some $7 billion. That's insane. That is not only insane, it's irresponsible, and most importantly, it's out of touch. I say to my colleagues, the chairman of the chairman of the subcommittee, that you are out of touch with what's going on in the world and the United States military. You better get in touch.
I would just add that anybody who doesn't believe there's an emergency in the United States military is not listening to the United States military, and you have not been following the consequences of what we've done over the last 5-6 years in terms of cuts to the military. Over the last 7 or 8 years, we've cut $1 trillion out of the United States military. We're on track to have the smallest Army since 1940, the smallest Navy since 1915, the smallest Air Force in modern times. We're on track to spend half of what we normally spend in time of war. Normally, we spend about 4.5% of GDP to defend this nation. We're on track by 2021 to spend 2.3% of GDP. I just want to say, this, in my view, is an emergency. I want you to go back home and explain to those who are busting their ass to fight this war, who can't fly equipment because it's too dangerous, who are having to cannibalize planes to keep some planes in the air, who are stretched so thin that it's creating high risk. Here's what the General of the Army said, the Chief of Staff of the Army. I characterize us at this current state at high military risk. So this is the Chief of Staff of the Army telling you, all of us, that the Army is in a high state of risk because of budget cuts. This $18 billion will restore money that has been taken out that will have a beneficial effect now and is absolutely essential. It will give 15,000 more people in the Army, and if you're in the Army, you would like to have some more colleagues because you've been going back and forth, back and forth. So we need more people in the Army, not less. 3,000 more Marines. If anybody is borne the burden of this war, it is the United States Marine Corps. Here's what I say. Let's hire more Marines. Let's start listening to what's going on in the military. The whole theory of this amendment is that we've let this deteriorate to the point that we have an emergency situation where we're putting our men and women's lives at risk because they don't have the equipment they need, the training opportunities they deserve to fight the war that we can't afford to lose. And you're going to vote no because you're worried about budget caps. Oh, we love the military. Everybody loves the military. Well, your love doesn't help them. Your love doesn't buy a damn thing. If you love these men and women, you will adequately fund their needs. If you care about them and their families, you will adjust the budget so they can fight a war on our behalf. We're up here arguing about everything. The state of politics in America makes me sick. Looks like one thing we could agree on: libertarians, vegetarians, Republicans, and Democrats, that those who are fighting this war deserve better than we're giving them. So I want to tell you, when you come and vote against this amendment because you're worried about the budget caps, well, the Budget Committee is not going to fight this war. To my friends at Heritage Actions, I agree with you a lot. You're saying this is a bad vote. Nobody at Heritage Action is going to go over to Afghanistan, Iraq, or Syria, or Libya to protect this country. You talk about a head-in-the-sand Congress. You talk about people who are not listening, that are so worried about special interest groups and concepts that have absolutely no basis in reality. If you fully implement sequestration, all you've done is gut the military and some non-defense programs that really matter to us. You haven't changed the debt at all. So don't go around telling people you're getting us to a balanced budget. You're not. The money's in entitlements, and we're not doing a damn thing about it. Now, Ryan Murray added some money, and I want to thank them, but it wasn't enough. I want to thank the appropriators for adding $7 billion, but it's not nearly enough. The $18 billion that is in this amendment goes to buy airplanes, 14 F-18s, 5 F-35s, 2 F-35Bs. It's $200 million to help the Israelis with their missile defense program. What this buys is more people, more equipment, more training opportunities at a time that we need all the above. It breaks the cap because we're in an emergency situation. These caps are strangling our ability to defend this nation. I hate what we've done to the military. This is a small step forward. This is not nearly what we need, but this $18 billion will provide some needed relief to the people who have been fighting this war for 15 years. So I hope and pray that you'll start listening to those that we put in charge of our military and respond to their needs. And this is a small step in the right direction. And if we say no to this amendment, God help us all. And you own it. You own the state of high risk. If you vote no, then as far as I'm concerned, you better never say I love the military anymore. Because if you really loved them, you would do something about it.
But I also point out to my colleague that as a sign of priorities around this place, yesterday we had a vote on medical research on nearly $1 billion that had nothing to do with the military, but was the place where the Willie Sutton syndrome took place. And there was a 5% increase. They could increase, the appropriators could increase by 5% medical research, which has nothing to do with the military, but they won't add money to the military could use to defend this nation. There is no greater example of the priorities around this place. Now, I see my colleagues are waiting. I just want to point out what voting no means. Voting no would be a vote in favor of another year where the pay for our troops doesn't keep pace with inflation or private sector averages. This is 1.6, for the fourth year in a row. The military will receive less of a pay raise than the rate of inflation. You vote no, that's what you're doing. You vote no, it'd be a vote in favor of cutting more soldiers, more Marines, at a time when the operational requirements for our nation's land forces from the Middle East and Africa to Europe and Asia are growing. Every time you turn around, you'll see that there are more troops deployed in more places, whether it be Iraq, Syria, Libya, our European initiative where we're going to, European reassurance initiative. Every time you turn around, there's more deployment, more deployments in the Far East, in the Asia-Pacific region. So every time you turn around, there's more obligations that we are, albeit incrementally, and yet we're going to cut the funding while we increase the commitments that we have. So you'd be voting in favor of cutting more soldiers and Marines at a time when the operational requirements of our nation's land forces are growing. Voting no would be a vote in favor of continuing to shrink the number of aircraft that are available to the Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps at a time when they're already too small to perform their current missions and are being forced to cannibalize. We have people who are having to go to the boneyard in Tucson, Arizona, and take parts from planes that haven't been operationally for years. That's how bad the system has become, thanks to sequestration. Our maintainers, these incredible enlisted people, are working 16 to 18 hours a day trying to keep these planes in the air. An Air Force squadron came back, and of the 20 airplanes, 6 were flyable. There was a piece in Fox News the other day about down in Beaufort, South Carolina, the F-18 squadron, where they're having to have a plane in the hangar that they can take parts from so that they can keep other planes flying. They're exhausted. They're exhausted, these young Marines. And by the way, don't think that they're going to stay in when they are subjected to this kind of work environment. Voting no would be a favor to shrink the number of aircraft. They're too small, and their current missions are being forced, as I said, to cannibalize their own fleets. Voting no will be a vote in favor. We give a vote in favor of letting arbitrary budget caps set the timeline for our mission in Afghanistan instead of giving our troops and our Afghan partners a fighting chance to victory. Voting no is in favor of continuing to ask our men and women in uniform to perform more and more tasks with inadequate readiness, inadequate equipment, inadequate numbers of people, and unacceptable levels of risk to their missions and themselves. It's unfair to them. It's wrong. It's wrong. For the sake of the men and women in our military who are putting their lives on the line as we speak to defend this nation, I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will make the right choice. For 5 years, we've let politics, not strategy, determine what resources we give our military service members. Our military commanders have warned us that we risk sending young Americans into a conflict for which they are not prepared. I know the vast majority of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle recognize the mistakes of the past 5 years have created this danger. This is the reality. This is the reality our soldiers, airmen, and Marines are facing. So I say, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. And if you vote no, as my colleague from South Carolina said, you vote no, just don't say you're in favor of the military, okay? Don't be that hypocritical. Just say you can continue to put the lives of these men and women who are serving in the military, in the words of the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, in greater danger. That's your responsibility. But just don't go home and say how much you appreciate the men and women in the military, because when you vote no, you are depriving them the ability to defend this nation and themselves. Mr. President, I yield the floor.